There are some people in this world, like my wife, who will never touch a cup of coffee. If you ask her why, she'll say that it's because she's not old enough to drink coffee yet. And then there will be people who will occasionally have a cup of coffee every now and then. And then there are people who really drink coffee, like every day drink coffee. And one of the things that I find interesting about the practice of regular coffee drinking is that for many people, it's not just about the consuming of the coffee. It's about the ritual of it as well. Because it's a habit that gets done every day, there's often a regular rhythm to the process. It happens at the same place, the same time. If you're buying it, there's a whole process of going to a coffee shop and seeing the people who work there and making it a part of your routine. For people who make their own coffee, there's often a specific way that they like to make it. There's an order and a rhythm. And if you ask a coffee drinker to answer honestly, almost all of them would admit that there's a particular joy that comes not just from the coffee, but from the ritual itself. Simply beginning the ritual of making coffee often will make you feel better physically, even before the first sip. In a religious context, the word ritual often gets a bad rap. Sometimes it's seen as something that is lifeless or dead, something that we're being told we have to do and that has no real effect on our lives. And sure, religious rituals can be done badly. They can suck the life out of us instead of giving us life. But the truth is that actually, humans crave rituals. Our lives are filled with regular rituals that mark the passage of time, signal important events in our lives, and help shape us into particular kinds of people. And I'm not just talking about the context of church here. If you think about it, if you think about the regular practices that fill your days, from a cup of coffee to how you go to work in the morning, to how you celebrate holidays with your family, to what you do before a sports game, and so on. Our lives are filled with rituals. And in the absence of rituals, we'll even make them up if we have to. Rituals are part of the task of meaning making in every area of life. This is the third Sunday in a series on worship. A couple of weeks ago, we talked about what worship is. The definition that we began with comes from a worship and preaching book called Preparing Sunday Dinner. They say that Christian worship is an encounter with the triune God experienced in the midst of community, which transforms and empowers members of Christ's body for loving witness and service in the world. Or more simply put, worship has three major parts to it. It starts with an encounter with God, which leads to an honest engagement with ourselves and others, and then empowers us for faithful living. Those are parts of worship that can show up in every culture, time, and place, and can be lived out and expressed in a whole host of different ways. When we're talking about worship, we're not just talking about a particular style of worship or particular worship elements, but rather we're talking about these deeper movements of encounter, engagement, and empowerment. But at the same time, we can't just live in the abstract. We need particular ways for us to express these parts of worship. We have to put legs to this. Last week we talked about how music plays a role in worship and how music is something that really goes beyond our intellect, beyond our conscious mind, and instead reaches deep into our souls to connect with us. And this week, we're talking about the role that rituals play in our life together as a church. There are a number of different ways to describe rituals, but at the heart of it, a ritual is not about words. A ritual is about actions. Yes, there can be words involved and they can be important, but rituals are first and foremost things that we do. They are acts that we live out with our bodies. They are practices, habits. They are a way of embodying the spiritual. They put flesh and blood onto the divine. Preparing Sunday Dinner says this: "What defines a ritual is action. More than speaking or listening to words, a ritual invites us to touch, see, smell, taste, and move." Rituals are lived practices. And when I say practices, yes, I'm talking about the things that we do over and over again, but I'm also talking about the things that we do maybe once or twice in our lifetimes. When we think about the different types of rituals, I actually think about them in 4 different categories based on how often we do them. First of all, we have the common rituals of faith, the things we do on a daily basis or even more than once a day. Things like praying before meals or when we wake up or go to bed, things like reading and studying our Bibles, or even things like making the sign of the cross like Catholics and Orthodox Christians do. These are often repeated daily rituals that we engage in. But then there are rituals that we do more like once a week. When we gather together each week, we share in a series of a series of regular practices and rituals within a worship service. These regular weekly rituals are sometimes called the liturgy, which, by the way, the word liturgy actually quite literally means the work of the people, which again points to the fact that these rituals are something that we are doing and that we are doing together. In any case, these regular rituals in our worship service include things like gathering, praising, adoring and thanking, confessing sin and receiving assurance, offering, proclaiming, affirming faith, witness and testifying, praying, and sending. These are all a type of weekly ritual that we do together. But then there are rituals that we do a couple times a year, or even maybe just once a year, most of which are centered around particular important events in the church calendar. The celebrations of Advent, Christmas, Epiphany, Lent, Easter, the baptism of Jesus, Love Feast, Foot Washing, Pentecost, Communion, and so on. All of these are times that are based around rituals that come around once a year or a couple of times a year. And yet they still carry with them deep meaning and importance in our lives. And then there are the rituals that happen even less often. There are some rituals that we may gather as a church to do repeatedly, but that are still once in a lifetime kinds of rituals for particular individuals. Things like funerals and weddings and baptisms and child dedications are the kinds of things that we might only go through once or twice in our lifetimes, which in many ways does not take away from their importance, but rather makes them all the more important to do well and to get right. Rituals can be done daily, weekly, once a year, or even once in a lifetime. But they all shape us in important ways. Which means that it's actually worth asking, well, how do rituals shape us? What are rituals actually doing to us when we act them out? probably worth saying that our particular Christian tradition has often had a somewhat ambivalent relationship with rituals over the centuries. On one hand, we have reacted against high church rituals that people have claimed had some magical power just by doing them. We have said, well, no, they're just symbols. They're symbols of other spiritual realities. For example, whereas Catholics would say that the bread and the wine actually physically turn into the body and blood of Jesus, we've said, no, that's just still bread and wine, but it points us to the more important reality of Jesus. On the other hand, this right and needed critique has sometimes led us too far in the other direction. We wind up thinking that rituals don't really have any power or meaning, and they're ultimately unnecessary. At the end of the day, I think there's a balance to be had. Rituals are actually doing two things at the same time. First, they are expressions of what we already believe. They are signs and symbols of things we have experienced or have chosen to believe. Baptism is a public sign of a spiritual conversion that happens in our hearts, for example. And at the same time, rituals change us. It's also true that rituals teach us things through the doing of the ritual that cannot be fully explained with words. It is one thing to say that we remember the death of Jesus. It is another thing to physically eat the bread and juice, just as we recreate the Last Supper, placing ourselves in the room with Jesus and almost receiving the bread and wine from him. But let's put a finer point on this. How are rituals changing us? In the book Preparing Sunday Dinner, the way that the authors say it is that rituals give us three gifts: order, community, and transformation. When we say that rituals give order, we mean a couple things. First is that Christian rituals remind us that there is an underlying cosmic order and that we are in God's care. They connect us with something that is beyond any given moment in life. The other thing that we mean is that ritual can give a structure to life. They are markers of the passage of time. They're signposts that help us move from one stage of life to another. And they can draw us out of the chaos of life and help us be attentive to important moments in life. For example, today our hymns are tied to different rituals in the church year. We have a Christmas song, a love feast song, and an Easter song. And my suspicion is that as we sing each of these songs, it is easy to find ourselves drawn into the celebration of those ritual times. Doing even part of the ritual can quickly pull us out of one time and place and into another. Rituals also create and connect us to a community of people. Yes, some rituals are done alone, but Christian rituals are done most often with other people, or at least with the knowledge that other Christians are doing them as well. There is a bonding experience in the doing of the ritual. Foot washing is a ritual that bonds us to other humans in ways that we would not otherwise be bonded. Even more powerfully, rituals can tie us back together even when we're apart. The rituals that we do today in our worship service tie us back to previous shared experiences and connect us to each other, even though we're not sitting in the same room. Shared rituals are one of the key things that makes us into a community in the first place. And finally, rituals give us the gift of transformation in three particular ways. First, rituals help us practice acts that would otherwise be unnatural for us, so that we are ready when we need to be. In the same way, an athlete repeats a particular motion thousands of times so that when they need to do it in the middle of a big game, they do it more by instinct than conscious thought. In the same way, when we do things like pray together over and over and over and over, well, when times of real difficulty come upon us, that has trained us to go to our knees in prayer out of instinct, not simply conscious choice. Secondly, rituals transform us by helping us to relive the sacred stories of our past instead of simply retelling them. In baptism, Advent, Lent, communion, foot washing, and many others, we don't just read the story, but rather we place ourselves in the story and live it out for ourselves. And when we do that, we are transformed in a third way, because we come to learn things that go beyond what we can describe with words. For example, I knew about foot washing and Love Feast, but it was when I found myself washing the feet of an old man at my girlfriend's church that something deep in my soul opened up and I understood this reality in a totally new way. Rituals are something that we need, both in our worship of God and throughout all of life. Yes, rituals can be done poorly and can weigh us down. But when we attend well to the rituals of our lives, they hold the power to connect us more fully with God, with each other, and with this world. As we go through our lives together, my prayer is that the rituals that you live out might give you life. May they mark the important moments of time, and may they draw you closer to the presence of God. Amen.